Welcome, fellow truth seekers, to a channel where we dare to ask the questions others won't. Whether you're settling in for the night, working with headphones on, or simply letting your mind wander while you cook or clean, you found a place where quiet storytelling meets bold inquiry. If this kind of deep dive content speaks to you, consider hitting that like button and subscribing. It helps curious minds like yours discover stories that challenge what we think we know. And please, share in the comments how these mysteries make you think differently about our past. Do you listen at night to drift off to sleep, or during the day while your hands stay busy? However you join us, know that if you drift away mid-story, timestamps are waiting in the description to guide you back. Tonight, we're diving into one of history's most controversial subjects, a story so challenging to accepted wisdom that many scientists still whisper about it in hallways rather than publish it openly. Stay curious, stay questioning, and prepare to discover why the story of humanity's greatest journey might be nothing like what you learned in school. The forbidden question science doesn't want you to ask. What if everything you were taught about the discovery of America was deliberately simplified? What if the real story is so complex, so challenging to our understanding of human capability, that it's easier to teach a myth than confront the truth? For generations, school children have learned a tidy timeline. Columbus in 1492, maybe the Vikings a few centuries earlier if the teacher was feeling generous. Perhaps a mention of Native Americans being here for thousands of years, a vague gesture toward deep time that avoids uncomfortable specifics. But here's what they don't tell you in those neat textbook timelines. Humans may have been exploring, settling, and mastering the Americas for over 30,000 years. That's not thousands, that's tens of thousands. We're talking about a story that predates the pyramids of Egypt by 20,000 years. Why keep this quiet? The answer is more disturbing than you might imagine. The traditional story serves a purpose. It makes European contact seem like the real beginning of American history. It reduces tens of thousands of years of human achievement to a footnote. It transforms the Americas from an ancient homeland into a new world waiting to be discovered. But what happens when footprints in New Mexico date to 23,000 years ago? What happens when DNA analysis reveals ghost populations that shouldn't exist according to our models? What happens
truly capable of crossing oceans, adapting to ice ages, and building sustainable communities across two continents 20,000 years before Stonehenge was built? What does that say about the sophistication of our ancestors? What does it say about the societies that thrived and vanished before recorded history began? These aren't just academic questions. They challenge our entire understanding of human capability, of cultural development, of what's possible when people are pushed to the edge of survival. The forbidden question that keeps archaeologists awake at night isn't just, when did humans arrive in the Americas? It's, how many times did they arrive? How many civilizations rose and fell? And how much of their story is now lost beneath the sea? But here's the most unsettling question of all. If we've been wrong about something this fundamental, what else might we be wrong about? As we dive deeper into this mystery, remember that every answer leads to new questions. Every discovery challenges not just dates on a timeline, but our assumptions about what early humans could achieve. Coming up next, we'll explore the giants that once walked alongside humans, and the controversial evidence that suggests our ancestors didn't just hunt these massive creatures, but may have lived in harmony with them for thousands of years. But first, what do you think? Are we ready to confront a history more complex than our textbooks suggest? Let us know in the comments. When giants walked among humans. Picture this. You're standing in a grassland 15,000 years ago, and the ground trembles. Not from an earthquake, but from the footsteps of a creature so massive it defies imagination. A mammoth, standing 14 feet tall, weighing 8 tons, its curved tusks gleaming in the Ice Age sun. Now picture something that might shock you. A human child playing nearby, unafraid. This isn't fantasy. The archaeological evidence suggests something remarkable. Early Americans didn't just hunt these giants. They may have lived alongside them in ways we're only beginning to understand. The traditional narrative is simple. Humans arrived, hunted the megafauna to extinction, end of story. It's called the overkill hypothesis, and it's been taught as fact for decades. But what if it's wrong? What if the relationship between humans and Ice Age giants was far more complex, more sustainable, and more sophisticated than we ever imagined? In Pennsylvania, revealed mammoth bone fragments arranged in patterns that suggest temporary shelters. Were early Americans building homes with the bones of giants? Even more intriguing is the evidence from the La Brea tar pits. Among the thousands of fossilized animals, researchers found something unexpected: human artifacts mixed with giant ground sloth remains, dating to periods when these creatures should have been extinct. Did some megafauna survive longer than we thought? Were humans actively protecting certain species? The DNA evidence adds another layer to this mystery. Genetic analysis of modern bison reveals something startling. Their population crashed not 13,000 years ago when humans supposedly arrived, but much more recently. This suggests that large herbivores coexisted with humans for millennia. What if the mass extinction of megafauna wasn't caused by human arrival, but by human departure? Think about it. If small populations of humans had learned to live sustainably with these giants for thousands of years, what would happen if climate change or disease suddenly reduced the human population? The delicate balance would collapse. Without human fire management, without the ecological relationships that had developed over millennia, the giants would face extinction, not from overhunting, but from the absence of their human partners. This theory is controversial because it challenges a fundamental assumption that early humans were necessarily destructive. What if they were actually ecosystem engineers, maintaining balances that took thousands of years to develop? The evidence keeps accumulating. At White Sands, human footprints are found walking alongside ground sloth tracks, not hunting them, not fleeing from them, walking parallel paths, as if sharing the same trails. At the Santa Isabel Iztapan site in Mexico, a mammoth was found with spear points lodged in its ribs, but the wounds had healed. This animal lived with human weapons in its body, suggesting capture and release, not a killing blow. Were early Americans practicing a form of wildlife management we can barely comprehend today? Here's the thought that should keep you awake tonight. If humans lived sustainably with Ice Age giants for 15,000 years, developing complex relationships we're only beginning to understand, what happened to that knowledge? When the megafauna finally disappeared, did we lose more than just the animals themselves? Did we lose entire systems of ecological wisdom that took millennia to develop? Everything. What if I told you that hidden in the DNA of living people are the genetic signatures of populations that officially never existed? Welcome to one of the most mind-bending discoveries in modern archaeology: ghost populations. These are groups of people whose genetic traces linger in the DNA of their descendants, but who left behind no artifacts, no sites, no clear archaeological evidence of their existence. They are literally genetic ghosts haunting the modern world. The story begins in 2015, when geneticists analyzing indigenous DNA from the Amazon made a discovery that should have been impossible. Mixed in with the expected Native American genetic markers were traces of something else, DNA that looked more similar to populations from Australia and New Guinea than to any other Native American group. How could Aboriginal Australian DNA end up in the Amazon rainforest? The geneticists called this mysterious ancestry Population Y. Y for unknown, for mysterious, for the questions it raised that no one could answer. The genetic traces were faint but undeniable. Somewhere in the deep past, a population carrying Australasian genetic signatures had made it to South America. But this wasn't supposed to be possible. The official story says all Native Americans descended from a single population that crossed from Siberia. There was no room in the model for Australasian ancestry. Yet there it was, hiding in plain sight in the genomes of Amazonian peoples. The implications were staggering. If population Y really existed, it meant the settlement of the Americas wasn't a single migration, but multiple waves of people arriving at different times, from different places, with different origins. It meant the textbooks were wrong, again. But population Y was just the beginning. As geneticists looked deeper, they found more ghost populations lurking in the DNA. Population A, detectable in the genomes of some Mexican indigenous groups. The ancient Beringians, found in Alaskan remains but with no clear modern descendants. Each ghost population told the same disturbing story. The Americas had been settled not once but again and again by groups we knew almost nothing about. Here's where it gets truly controversial. Some geneticists now believe these ghost populations might represent not just different migration waves, but entirely different migration routes. What if some early Americans didn't come through Alaska at all, with other Native American groups around 9,000 years ago, implying they were already well established by then? But here's the truly unsettling part. If these ghost populations left genetic traces, they must have existed in significant numbers for significant periods of time. You can't detect genetic admixture from a handful of individuals who arrived and immediately disappeared. These were thriving communities that lived alongside other Native American populations for thousands of years. So where are their artifacts? Where are their settlements? Where is the archaeological evidence that such populations ever existed? The answer might be underwater. During the Ice Ages, sea levels were 400 feet lower than today. Entire continental shelves that now lie beneath the Pacific and Atlantic were dry land. If these mysterious populations lived along ancient coastlines, their settlements would now be under hundreds of feet of water. They would be invisible to traditional archaeology. But there's another possibility, one that's even more controversial. What if these ghost populations were deliberately hidden from history? What if later arriving groups absorbed, displaced, or eliminated the earlier settlers so completely that only their genetic signatures survived? What if the history of the Americas includes not just migration, but conquest, displacement, and the systematic erasure of earlier peoples? This isn't just speculation. The ancient Beringians, detected in Alaskan DNA, appear to have been completely replaced by later populations. Their genetic lineage simply vanishes from the archaeological record around 6,000 years ago. Something happened to them. But what? The ghost populations force us to confront an uncomfortable truth. The history we can see archaeologically might represent only the final chapter of a much longer, more complex story. For every Native American group we know about, there might be others who vanished so completely that only their DNA remains, scattered like shadows through the genomes of the survivors. And if this is true for the Americas, what does it mean for human history everywhere else? How many ghost populations haunt the DNA of Europeans, Asians, Africans? How many lost peoples lived and died without leaving any trace except the faintest genetic echoes? Coming up, we'll explore evidence of sophisticated civilizations that thrived beneath ice around fires, struggling against an impossible climate. But what if this image is completely backwards? What if the Ice Ages created the perfect conditions for human civilization to explode into sophistication we can barely comprehend today? Consider this. During the last Ice Age, sea levels were 400 feet lower. This didn't just expose new land, it exposed millions of square miles of coastal plain that we now call the continental shelf. These weren't barren wastelands. They were river deltas, grasslands, forests and coastal zones teeming with life. And they were perfect for human settlement. The Bering land bridge, which we've always imagined as a narrow strip of frozen tundra, was actually a subcontinent the size of Alaska and California combined. Beringia wasn't a bridge, it was a homeland. But here's what will really shock you. Recent archaeological evidence suggests that humans didn't just pass through Beringia. They lived there for over 10,000 years, developing sophisticated cultures, complex tool technologies, and possibly even permanent settlements. Where is the evidence? Under 200 feet of Arctic Ocean water. The drowning of Beringia wasn't just an environmental catastrophe, it was a cultural apocalypse. Entire civilizations, thousands of years of human development, cities, trade networks, technological innovations, all lost beneath the waves when the ice melted. But Beringia isn't the only lost world. Off the coast of every continent, beneath the shallow seas, lie the remains of Ice Age landscapes that once supported human populations. Doggerland, the submerged plain between Britain and Europe, has already yielded stone tools, mammoth bones with human cut marks, and evidence of sophisticated hunting camps dating to 12,000 years ago. If Doggerland supported complex human societies, why not the drowned plains off America's coasts? Here's where it gets controversial. Some researchers believe that the most advanced Ice Age civilizations were precisely those that lived on the continental shelves, the areas now lost beneath the sea. Think about it logically. Coastal zones offer the richest, most diverse resources: marine foods, fresh water from rivers, game animals coming to drink, migratory birds, edible plants. If you wanted to support large, stable human populations during the Ice Age, the coastal plains would be ideal.
Understood perspective, shading, and animal anatomy with remarkable accuracy. If humans living in the harsh interiors could achieve such sophistication, what might those living in the resource-rich coastal zones have accomplished? Some researchers have proposed a controversial theory that the Ice Age coastal civilizations might have achieved levels of complexity that wouldn't be seen again until after agriculture developed 10,000 years later. They might have had permanent settlements, specialized crafts, long-distance trade networks, even early forms of agriculture based on managing wild plant and animal populations. But here's the most unsettling possibility. What if some Ice Age technologies were actually superior to what came later? Consider the Clovis point, a stone tool so sophisticated that modern experts struggle to replicate it. The fluting technique required to create these points involves removing a single, perfectly controlled flake from the base of the tool. One mistake ruins hours of work. This wasn't primitive technology. This was high-precision engineering. Now consider that Clovis points appear suddenly in the archaeological record around 13,000 years ago, with no clear developmental sequence. They seem to emerge fully formed, as if the technology was already perfected somewhere else. Where was that somewhere else? Perhaps on the drowned continental shelves, in workshops and settlements now lost beneath 200 feet of ocean water. What other technologies might have been lost? What innovations in boat building, food preservation, textile production, even mathematics and astronomy vanished when the seas rose? There's another disturbing possibility. What if the melting of the ice sheets didn't just drown the coastal civilizations, but triggered a global catastrophe that set human development back thousands of years? The Younger Dryas period, which began around 12,900 years ago, saw a sudden return to near-glacial conditions that lasted over 1,000 years. This climate disaster coincides exactly with the disappearance of many Ice Age cultures and the extinction of most megafauna. What if this wasn't just a natural climate fluctuation, but the result of the catastrophic melting of Ice Age ice sheets? What if the rising seas and changing climates destroyed not just individual settlements, but entire networks of human civilization? The survivors would have been reduced to small, scattered groups, forced to rebuild everything from scratch, found in places that challenge everything we thought we knew about early human capabilities. But pause for a moment and consider. If entire civilizations lie beneath our coastal waters, what would it mean to recover just one intact site? What technologies might we rediscover? Share your thoughts. The implications are staggering. The controversial footprints that shouldn't exist. What if I told you that the most powerful evidence for early human presence in the Americas isn't a tool, isn't a bone, isn't even a piece of art, but something as simple and undeniable as a footprint? At White Sands National Park in New Mexico, in the gypsum dunes of an ancient lakeshore, archaeologists have uncovered something that should be impossible according to mainstream chronology. Human footprints dated to 23,000 years ago. These aren't just any footprints. They're the footprints of children, teenagers, and adults walking across the mudflats of an Ice Age lake. Some tracks show people carrying heavy loads. Others show children playing, running, splashing in the shallow water. They're so perfectly preserved you can see individual toe impressions, and they're 10,000 years older than humans were supposed to be in the Americas. The implications are staggering. If these dates are correct, and multiple independent dating methods confirm they are, then humans weren't just present in North America during the last glacial maximum. They were thriving. They were raising families, playing, working, living full lives in a landscape we thought was uninhabitable. But here's what makes these footprints truly controversial. They force us to confront the possibility that everything we've been taught about Ice Age North America is wrong.
The traditional model says the continent was locked under ice sheets, uninhabitable, unreachable. The White Sands footprints suggest that while the north might have been frozen, the southwest was not only habitable, but actively inhabited by thriving human communities. And these people weren't struggling to survive. The footprint evidence shows something remarkable: leisure time. Some of the tracks appear to show teenagers and young adults engaged in what can only be described as play, racing each other, walking in circles, even what appears to be a form of dance or ritual movement around the ancient lakeshore. You don't play games when you're starving. You don't engage in ritual activities when you're struggling.
Presence. Were Ice Age humans domesticating megafauna? The evidence is tantalizing but ambiguous. What's clear is that the relationship between humans and Ice Age giants was more complex than simple predator-prey dynamics. Even more intriguing are the footprints that seem to show organized group activities, lines of people walking in formation, adults and children moving together in patterns that suggest coordinated group movement. Were these hunting parties, migration groups, or something else entirely? Perhaps pilgrimage routes to sacred sites, trading expeditions, or seasonal gatherings. The footprints also reveal something about Ice Age technology that challenges our assumptions. Some tracks show impressions of what appear to be woven baskets or containers pressed into the mud alongside human feet. If confirmed, this would push back the evidence for sophisticated textile technology by thousands of years. But here's the most controversial aspect of the White Sands discovery: it's not unique. Similar footprint sites have been found across the Americas, all dating to periods when humans supposedly weren't present. In Chile, in Argentina, in California, wherever conditions allowed preservation, ancient human footprints are turning up in impossible contexts. The scientific establishment's response has been predictable: demand extraordinary evidence, question dating methods, suggest alternative interpretations. Some critics have argued that the footprints could be much younger than they appear, contaminated by groundwater or misidentified entirely. But the evidence keeps mounting. Independent laboratories using different dating techniques keep returning the same impossible ages. The footprints are exactly where they appear to be, in undisturbed sediments deposited during the last glacial maximum. So why the resistance? Because accepting these footprints means accepting that our entire model of Ice Age North America needs to be rebuilt from the ground up. It means acknowledging that humans were not only present 23,000 years ago, but were thriving in numbers large enough to leave extensive track sites. It means recognizing that Ice Age Americans had sophisticated enough technology to create woven containers and organized enough society to engage in group activities. Most challenging of all, it means confronting the possibility that there were multiple waves of human migration into the Americas, some of which left no genetic descendants in modern populations. The White Sands people might represent a completely separate colonization event, one that's waiting to be discovered. We see a complex mosaic of human populations moving, adapting, sometimes succeeding, sometimes failing, across landscapes we can barely imagine. Some of these groups left descendants who became the ancestors of modern Native Americans. Others vanished completely, leaving only footprints in the sand as evidence of their existence. The children who played by that ancient lake in New Mexico, what happened to their descendants? Did they migrate elsewhere? Were they absorbed by later populations? Or did they simply disappear, victims of climate change, disease, or other catastrophes we can't yet understand? Their footprints remain, preserved in stone, asking questions we're still learning how to answer. Coming up, we'll explore the most audacious possibility of all: that Ice Age humans were already master sailors, capable of ocean voyages that wouldn't be matched again for thousands of years. But first, imagine walking in those ancient footprints. What would you have seen 23,000 years ago? What questions would you ask those vanished children? Let us know in the comments below. Ancient sailors who conquered impossible oceans. What if the most incredible voyages in human history happened not in the age of Columbus or Magellan, but 50,000 years before recorded history began? What if our Ice Age ancestors were master mariners whose ocean-crossing achievements make modern sailing look timid by comparison? The evidence for Ice Age seafaring isn't just compelling, it's undeniable. By 50,000 years ago, humans had reached Australia,
a continent that could only be accessed by crossing at least 60 miles of open ocean. This wasn't island hopping or accidental drift voyaging. This was deliberate ocean navigation, requiring sophisticated watercraft and navigational knowledge. But here's what should keep you awake at night. If humans could cross 60 miles of open ocean 50,000 years ago, what other impossible voyages might they have achieved? The traditional view of Ice Age humans as land-bound hunters is crumbling under the weight of archaeological evidence. At Monte Verde in Chile, archaeologists found 9 different species of seaweed, some collected from beaches dozens of miles apart. This wasn't casual beachcombing, it was systematic marine resource exploitation, requiring regular boat travel along extensive coastlines. On California's Channel Islands, humans were living and thriving 13,000 years ago,
shows strongest genetic similarities to populations from Australia and New Guinea. How could Aboriginal Australian genetic signatures end up in the Amazon rainforest? The most logical explanation is also the most audacious: direct trans-Pacific voyaging. What if Ice Age mariners, starting from Australia or New Guinea, followed the Pacific Rim northward, island hopping through Indonesia, along the Asian coast, across Beringia, and then down the American Pacific coast all the way to South America? This would have been a voyage covering over 20,000 miles of coastline and open ocean, accomplished with technology that mainstream archaeology insists didn't exist. But the genetic evidence suggests it happened, multiple times. The pattern isn't consistent with a single lucky voyage. The DNA signatures suggest sustained contact between Pacific populations and early Americans over thousands of years. This implies not just occasional voyages, but regular trans-Pacific navigation routes. Think about what this means. While Europe was locked under ice sheets and most of the world's humans were struggling with harsh continental climates, Pacific maritime peoples had created ocean-spanning trade and migration networks. They had turned the Pacific Ocean, the largest body of water on Earth, into an interconnected highway system. The technology required would have been extraordinary. Ocean-going vessels capable of carrying families, supplies, and livestock across thousands of miles of open water. Navigation systems based on reading currents, winds, stars, and wave patterns. Weather prediction abilities that allowed planning for month-long voyages. And the courage. Imagine being the first human to venture beyond sight of land, not knowing if there was anything out there except endless ocean. But there's evidence they had help from an unexpected source: the Ice Age itself. During glacial periods, the Pacific Rim was very different from today. Lower sea levels created island chains that are now submerged. The Bering land bridge wasn't just a bridge, it was a massive Arctic archipelago. What we now see as isolated islands were connected by exposed seafloor. The Ice Age mariners weren't crossing vast empty oceans, they were following a chain of islands, coastlines, and ice-free refugia that stretched from Australia to Chile. But even with these advantages, the achievement was remarkable. Modern sailing vessels with GPS, weather, the arrival of techniques developed in Pacific maritime cultures over thousands of years. What if the primitive Ice Age Americans were actually inheritors of advanced seafaring civilizations whose main settlements now lie beneath 400 feet of Pacific Ocean water? The implications extend beyond just the Americas. If Ice Age humans created Pacific-spanning navigation networks, what other ocean crossings might they have achieved? Could they have crossed the Atlantic, bringing American technologies to Europe? Could they have reached Africa from South America, explaining some puzzling similarities in ancient cultures? Could they have established global trade networks that connected all inhabited continents? The mainstream archaeological establishment resists these possibilities because they challenge fundamental assumptions about human development. We're taught that civilization progressed linearly from simple to complex, that ocean voyaging was a late innovation, that global connections only developed in historic times. But what if this model is backwards? What if Ice Age humans achieved levels of maritime sophistication that weren't matched again until the modern era? What if rising sea levels at the end of the Ice Age didn't just flood coastal settlements, but destroyed global navigation networks that had taken thousands of years to develop? The survivors would have been reduced to isolated continental populations,
forced to rebuild everything from scratch. The sophisticated maritime technologies, the navigational knowledge, the global connections, all lost beneath the waves. We might be looking at the archaeological record of decline, not progress. The remnants of a shattered maritime civilization slowly rebuilding what their ancestors had already achieved. Coming up, we'll explore the most haunting mystery of all, the people who vanished so completely that only their DNA remains, scattered like ghosts through the genomes of survivors. But first, consider this. If Ice Age humans could navigate the Pacific Ocean with Stone Age technology, what else might they have been capable of? What would their maps have looked like? Share your thoughts. The possibilities are endless. What if I told you that hidden in your DNA might be the genetic signature of people who never officially existed? What if some of the most important chapters of human history were written not by the survivors we can study, but by the vanished populations we can barely detect? Welcome to the most haunting mystery in human origins, the ghost populations whose only legacy is the faint, then vanished so completely that only their genetic shadows remain. These aren't theoretical populations. They're not statistical artifacts. They were real people who lived, loved, raised children, and somehow disappeared from history so thoroughly that we know them only as genetic ghosts. The most famous is Population Y, a group whose DNA signature appears in some Amazonian peoples but matches no other Native American population. Instead, it shows closest similarity to populations from Australia and New Guinea, suggesting a completely separate migration route and origin. But Population Y is just one of many genetic ghosts haunting human DNA. Population A appears in Mexican indigenous groups. The basal Eurasians show up in Middle Eastern populations. Ancient North Eurasians contributed to both Europeans and Native Americans, but have no clear modern descendants. Each ghost population tells the same disturbing story. Human history is not a neat tree of branching lineages, but a complex web of populations that merged, split, and often disappeared entirely. What makes these vanished peoples so unsettling is the scale of what they represent. To leave detectable genetic traces in modern populations, ghost populations must have existed in substantial numbers for substantial periods. These weren't small groups that quickly disappeared. They were thriving communities that persisted for thousands of years. So what happened to them? The possibilities range from natural disasters to systematic genocide. Climate change could have wiped out entire regions where ghost populations lived, leaving only those members who had already intermarried with other groups. Volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, or massive flooding could have destroyed their homelands so completely that no archaeological trace remains. But there's a darker possibility. These populations might have been deliberately eliminated by other human groups. The genetic evidence shows that most ghost population signatures date to periods of major population movements and cultural transitions. This suggests that the arrival of new peoples might have displaced or absorbed earlier inhabitants so thoroughly that their independent existence was erased. What we might be seeing in the genetic record is evidence of prehistoric conflicts, conquests, and genocides that left no territory uninhabitable. Were they displaced by expanding populations from the south? Or were they victims of something more violent? The silence of the archaeological record is deafening. But perhaps the most disturbing possibility is that these ghost populations represent the norm, not the exception, in human history. What if, for every population we can study archaeologically, there are dozens of others that vanished so completely we can barely detect them genetically? What if the human story is not primarily one of survival and continuity, but of constant disappearance and replacement? This possibility is supported by the pattern of ghost populations worldwide. They appear in every continental region, in every time period, suggesting that population turnover was a constant feature of human prehistory. The peoples we study today, the ancestors of modern populations, might not be the main story of human history, but simply the latest survivors of a much larger drama of rise and disappearance. Consider what this means for our understanding of human achievement. Every sophisticated technology, every cultural innovation, every adaptation to difficult environments that we attribute to known populations might actually have been first developed by ghost populations that no longer exist. The masterful cave paintings of Europe, the sophisticated tool technologies of the Americas, the maritime achievements of Pacific peoples, all of these might be pale reflections of even greater achievements by vanished populations, whose homelands now lie beneath the sea, or have been scoured clean by time. We might be studying not the pinnacle of human development, but the remnants left behind after the disappearance of far more accomplished societies. The ghost populations also raise uncomfortable questions about identity and continuity. Modern indigenous peoples are often assumed to be the direct descendants of the first inhabitants of their regions, but the genetic evidence suggests a much more complex story. Many modern populations show evidence of genetic contributions from multiple ghost populations, suggesting that their ancestry includes not just surviving lineages, but also vanished peoples who contributed their DNA before disappearing. What this means is that the story of human migration and settlement is not just about who survived, but about who didn't. The ghost populations might have been the majority, with modern humans representing only a small fraction of the total human diversity that once existed. And if this is entire populations, leaving only genetic traces for future archaeologists to puzzle over, will our descendants study us as ghost populations, detectable only in the DNA of whatever human societies manage to survive the challenges ahead? Coming up, we'll explore what all of this means for how we understand ourselves, our past, and our future. But first, consider this. If you could ask one question of any ghost population, which would you choose? What would you want to know from people who vanished so completely that only their DNA remains? Share your thoughts below. Their stories might be more relevant to our future than we realize. So, here we are, at the end of our journey into the forbidden history that challenges everything we thought we knew about human origins, migration, and capability. What we've discovered should fundamentally change how we understand ourselves as a species. We've seen evidence that humans may have been in the Americas 30,000 years ago, not the 13,000 years your textbooks claim. We've explored sophisticated Ice Age civilizations whose achievements were drowned beneath rising seas. We've examined footprints that shouldn't exist, DNA that tells impossible stories, and maritime achievements that eclipse anything accomplished in recorded history. But perhaps the most important discovery is what all of this reveals about the nature of knowledge itself. Why were these stories hidden from mainstream education? Why do we learn simplified timelines instead of complex truths? Why are we taught that human civilization progressed linearly from primitive to advanced, when the evidence suggests cycles of achievement and loss? The answer is uncomfortable but necessary. The stories we tell about the past are shaped by the needs of the present. The traditional narrative serves specific purposes. It makes modern civilization seem like the pinnacle of human achievement. It justifies the displacement of indigenous peoples by portraying them as recent arrivals themselves. It supports the myth of progress, the idea that everything always gets better, more advanced, more sophisticated over time. But what if this narrative is not just wrong, but dangerously wrong? What if understanding our true history is essential for navigating our future? Consider the implication we've discovered throughout this exploration is one of recurring cycles. Human societies achieving remarkable sophistication, then facing catastrophic challenges that either destroy them entirely or reduce them to scattered survivors who must rebuild from the remnants. The Ice Age maritime civilizations achieved global navigation networks that connected continents. Then rising seas destroyed their coastal cities, and scattered their knowledge to the winds. The first Americans developed technologies and cultural adaptations that allowed them to thrive across two continents for thousands of years. Then climate change and the arrival of new populations created disruptions that eliminated entire genetic lineages. Ancient peoples learned to live sustainably with Ice Age megafauna for millennia. Then, changing conditions led to mass extinctions that eliminated entire ecosystems. The pattern is always the same: achievement, adaptation, crisis, collapse, and painful rebuilding. What makes this pattern so disturbing is its relevance to our current situation. We've achieved technological capabilities that surpass anything in recorded history. We've created global networks that connect every corner of the planet. We've developed the ability to modify our environment on a scale that rivals geological forces. But we've also created vulnerabilities that match our capabilities. Climate change threatens to disrupt the stable conditions that allowed our civilization to develop. Technological dependencies make us vulnerable to system-wide collapses. Global interconnection means that local disasters can cascade into worldwide catastrophes. Are we repeating the pattern that destroyed our ancestors? The study of ghost populations reveals something even more unsettling. The majority of human societies throughout history didn't survive their challenges. They disappeared so completely that only genetic traces remain. The populations we study today, our own ancestors, weren't necessarily the most advanced or the most numerous. They were simply the ones who happened to survive. This should be a humbling thought. Our civilization isn't the inevitable result of steady progress. It's the latest experiment in a long series of human attempts to create stable, sustainable societies. Many of those previous experiments failed, despite achieving remarkable sophistication. Some left ruins that we study with wonder. Others vanished so completely that we detect them only as statistical patterns. Thousands of years had achieved something we've lost: the ability to be part of their ecosystem rather than its master. The Pacific maritime peoples had developed something we're struggling to maintain: global networks that enhanced rather than threatened local resilience. The ghost populations, despite their ultimate disappearance, had achieved something we rarely consider: genetic and cultural diversity that provided multiple pathways for human development. What would it mean to apply these lessons to our current challenges? It might mean developing technologies that enhance rather than replace natural systems. It might mean creating global networks that strengthen rather than threaten local communities. It might mean preserving cultural and genetic diversity as insurance against future challenges we can't yet imagine. Most importantly, it might mean accepting that our current civilization is not the end point of human development, but simply another experiment in the long history of human adaptation. The forbidden history we've explored tonight reveals that humans have always been capable of far more than we imagine. We've crossed impossible oceans, survived devastating climate changes, developed sophisticated technologies with limited resources, and created meaning and beauty under the harshest conditions. But it also reveals that no human achievement is permanent, no society is immune to collapse, and no population is guaranteed survival. The choice facing us is the same one that faced every human society throughout history. Will we learn to adapt to our changing world, or will we become another ghost population, detectable only in the DNA of whatever comes after us? The footprints at White Sands, the genetic echoes of vanished peoples, the drowned cities beneath our continental shelves. All of these remind us that we are part of a story much larger and older than we usually imagine. But they also remind us that our chapter of that story is still being written. What will future archaeologists find when they study our remains? Will they marvel at our achievements or puzzle over our sudden disappearance? Will our cities become new Atlantises, our technologies forgotten mysteries, our genetic signatures mere statistical ghosts in the DNA of our successors? The answer depends on choices we're making right now. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the forbidden history that challenges everything we thought we knew.
If this exploration has changed how you think about human capability, about or simply to step outside the boundaries of conventional thinking, remember that the story of humanity is far stranger, far older, and far more remarkable than any textbook will tell you. Stay curious, stay questioning, and remember that the greatest discoveries often come from asking the questions that everyone else considers forbidden.